Hold on. You are live now.
Good.
And well, you were live before.
Well, I've got visions of everybody out there now. We're running on our technical issues a few minutes late, shouting, "We want Graham! We want Graham!" So hopefully we're going to get started in literally a few seconds.
No, you are, and yeah, the numbers are going up, so people can see. It looks good. I can see it quite clearly. I think everything looks all right there. Let me just bring up all the cameras a sec so we can have a quick look. Let me just see how that all looks. Make sure we've got everything in. Good morning, everybody. Yep, we're all good, Mr. G. So, I'm going to need to apologise now, aren't I? There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ladies and gents, good morning, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody that's watching. I'm just going to fill for 30 seconds or so whilst the numbers pop up. Apologies, we are slightly late this morning. We've had some technical issues. Okay, your mic is up, yeah.
That's the excuse you used, Joel. It's not for me to judge.
So we're having a few internet problems this morning because we're right at the far end of the site, which basically is the area where we don't get any internet, so we're having to run some new cables and it's not really worked. On top of that, we went live. We did go live about 4 or 5 minutes late on the wrong internet channel. We went live on my channel instead of the Shrewsbury Prison, so that's on me, and no doubt I'll hear about it later. But we're there, we're ready, and I think we're all good. We should hopefully stream okay. We may get a couple of technical interruptions, for which I apologise, but I think other than that, if you're happy... Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Let me give me a couple of little plugs. Don't forget, guys, we open this Saturday on the 20th, opening at 10 o'clock. Opening at 10 o'clock, and we'll be open for self-guided tours. And don't forget, next Wednesday, which is the 24th, we're going to be doing another virtual guided tour, or Graham's going to be doing another virtual guided tour, and he will be doing that on the 2s in A-Wing, and you can come and watch that one live. So you can actually come and see it. You can stand above us on the landings, you can watch, and then you can heckle and shout out questions and stuff like that all throughout the live.
Heckle away.
Heckle away. Okay, heckle right. Away. Let's do visits, because that's what we're going to do. No one's missed anything yet other than me waffling on. Obviously, I've got my computer here, so if you want to throw up questions as we go, I will ping them over to Officer Goodwin. Other than that, people are saying good morning, good morning, good morning. It is over to you, Officer Goodwin. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. I think we're on episode 5 now. We're going to talk about visits today. The room that we're standing in at the moment isn't actually originally in a visits room. That was an old temporary building we had. This is actually sitting under the workshops. It was originally an old storeroom, but it's got the space and size that we need. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process of visits. All prisons will run the visit system virtually identical. It's a very much set standard. Convicted prisoners, they're entitled to a visit every 14 days. So that's sort of 2 in 28 days. And if they don't take that visit, they don't lose it. It's one of those visits that actually is theirs by right. It's enshrined in their rules and regulations. They cannot lose that visit regardless of anything that may or may not be going on. However, those 2 visits are a minimum. They can actually get more visits, be entitled to more visits, depending on the standard they're on. Prisons operate what they call an IEP system, basically where they either can be on a basic regime, a standard regime, which most prisoners end up on, and the enhanced regime. Depending on which one you are will depend on your access to extra visits. If you're on basic, you're only entitled to the 2 that are prescribed to you, and after that, if you're on standard, you can get extra visits, and if you're on enhanced you get even more. So some prisoners on enhanced can end up with 4 to 5 visits in any 1 month period. They're called privileged visits or privileged VOs, and reality is that if you don't use them when they're entitled to be used in that week, they're sort of use it or lose it. So you can't save those, but the other 2 are yours. Remands are treated slightly differently, simply because they're remands, and if they're waiting for trial, they're innocent until proven guilty. So there is an entitlement to more visits for remands, and different prisons operate in different ways how they put that in depending on their security, depending on the physical layout and the staff numbers that they've got. And as far as representation by solicitors, barristers, and all those legal and professionals that need to see the prisoner before court appearances, there's no restrictions on that whatsoever. So if there are legal visits needed, they can have as many as is necessary to deal with their situation and their cases and stuff like that. You should be able to see just to my side here that you'll see a little bit of a doorway just there. This is where prisoners come in for their visits. They're going to come off the wings in the afternoon. They're going to come in through those doors, but before they step out through this door, there, you can see Joe better than you can see me, or see us both perhaps, I don't know. All right, before they step out into these doors here, they're basically going to come in and they're going to end up being searched. Any loose items that they've got will need to be placed in a locker. We don't allow prisoners to bring in loose items. Watches, chains, necklaces, anything that may or may not be in their pockets will have to be left in there. They'll also put a bib on, a bit like a gym bib, a red bib, and that's for what they call quick identification. In the event of a serious situation either taking place in the visits and or something like a possible riot in the rest of the prison or a fire, where you need to move your civilians out, your visitors out as quickly as possible, it's about identifying who goes one way and who goes the other in an emergency. So they'll end up having to wear that bib when they come into the visits. And then they'll come through. Prisoners are always seated first. You'll probably be able to see on one of the cameras the room. The chairs that you see and the tables here are not original. They're just there to give you a bit of a view of how they would have been set up. Our tables were actually bolted to the floors and our chairs were welded to tables. You can well imagine if something goes off in a visits room where somebody, what they call kicking off, whether it be with their family, their friends, or officers have to intervene in something, loose tables and chairs can do a huge amount of damage to people that may be sitting around the visits. Remember, these visits have got young children coming through these doors as well. So everything's fixed. When prisoners come through doors, they're seated first. We always seat our prisoners first according to the security needs that we've got. And when we're happy with that situation, that's when we would allow the visitors to come through. Now, before we get to that point, how do prisoners achieve getting their visit? Now, when I first joined the service, prisoners used to have to come to members of staff and ask for what they call a VO, a visiting order. And we would go through their paperwork to see if they were entitled to it. We'd hand them that VO. They would then go and fill it out with the people that they wanted to visit, bring it back to us with the letter that they're going to send out, but unsealed. And then we would take the VO out, we would mark the VO out as being okay, acceptable, checked off, and we would then post that letter in the post box. The prisoner wouldn't get that letter back. And when that VO arrives at the home of the family they want to visit, that will have the date and the time and any identification needs that they'll need to bring with them. That changed quite a few years ago. They're now basically, it's a central system. I think it may be in Birmingham, where people just phone up and book visits. So there are occasions sometimes, if prisoners haven't been in contact by phone with their families or friends about who's coming to visit them, may get to a point where the visit might be booked, and the prisoners don't find out sometimes only a few hours before, when they see their name going up on a list on the landing saying you've got a visit this afternoon. Sometimes they come to the office and go, "Who's coming to visit me, boss?" I don't know who's come to visit, because they forgot to communicate. So it's the visitor now that makes that phone call to initiate that visit. And obviously they'll be told by the telephone operator whether that prisoner is entitled to the visit. And people have to be on an approved list. So everybody that comes to visit a prison needs to be checked out, as well, because there are some situations where prisoners are not allowed to receive a visit. That will be from ex-prisoners. There's a time limit when prisoners get out of prison before they're allowed to come back into an establishment to visit a current prisoner. And even then they may have to ask permission from a governor if that's acceptable to do so. No one's allowed to come in and visit an adult prisoner. We're in an adult prison now, unless they're 18 years old. So sometimes you'll have situations where some prisoners have girlfriends and partners that are under the age of 18. They will need to write to a governor and ask express permission to come to visit, and actually perhaps some relative proof that they actually are in a relationship. But very often it may be they have to be brought by somebody that's actually over the age of 18, so they have to be with an adult before they're allowed to come to visit.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good point. Just to interject.
You carry on, my friend. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we spoke a couple of weeks ago when we were doing the cells. We spoke about the cells at Shrewsbury. And we spoke about cells at more modern prisons. We spoke about how like tablets and things like that were in certain cells and on landings. And I think it's quite appropriate to talk about how when you were a prison officer here, everything was done by paper, wasn't it? So prisoners would fill out their prison visitor orders, bring them to you on the landing, give them to you, food orders and everything along those lines. And part of the reason they've put tablets in prisons now is so that prisoners can do it all electronically, which actually saves time and paperwork for the officer and for the prisoner.
Well, our newest of prisons will have, I believe, sort of like a laptop system in there where they can actually do their applications basically through the system, and all those other things can be done through the system, so it takes away the paperwork from staff, and it probably speeds the process up and makes it that little bit more efficient. So we've got the prisoners come and they're seated now and waiting for their visits to come. I'm just going to move to the other side of the room and talk about the visitor side of things, about how they'll be coming into the prison and process. So,
which will be really good because Lucas, age 10, and Evan have both asked whether visitors get searched when they come in, whether they get searched all over. So Officer Goodwin's going to pick that up now.
Can I do that there? Can you see me, Mother?
I've got you. Apologies, ladies and gents, about the streaming issues where it goes out of focus. It's not that we don't want you to see Officer Goodwin, it is just we are having some internet issues this morning, so please try and bear with us. It may drop in and out of focus, but hopefully the sound should be really, really clear. And remember, you can always come and visit yourselves on a self-guided tour and see it yourselves, or you can come on a guided tour, which restart on the 18th of July, and you can come round with Officer Goodwin himself for 2 hours, and he'll take you through all these areas and give you all of this information as well on a tour. And that you'll even let them take photos, won't you?
Absolutely. There's a small charge for autographs, of course, but always open to negotiation.
To give out a tip bucket.
Okay, so I'm at the other end of the visits room now. Obviously, prisoners have come in there, all be seated to wait for the visitors to come through. When they arrive at the gate, visitors, they'll have to prove the ID to prove that they are who they say they are. And at that point, they'll be checked in there, and they'll step into some little ante-rooms that we've got in the gate where they will go through the searching process. So families will be searched when they come through the doors. And depending on the establishment you're in, will depend on how high and how vigorous that search may be. If you're thinking of somewhere like Belmarsh or one of our high security prisons, they'll basically go through airport security, as do staff when they come into those prisons to work, go through what we would call airport security, where things go through scanners, and you may be taking your shoes off and you may be taking your belts off and walking through the old arches with the metal detectors and such like. Shrewsbury Prison, we weren't that high of a security prison, but we were thorough. People came through, they might have their bags checked, they would have searches, they may have a rub-down search, and then they're not allowed to bring loads of stuff. So if they've got handbags and big bags, if they've got prams and different things, they will be left at the gate. And basically we had lockers there where people could put their personal possessions, phones, all the things that they need, keys and everything like that would be left at the gate. They could bring just enough money down they may need to buy the soft drinks and the coffee and the tea and the treats they were allowed to buy on visits for the prisoners. Prisoners are not allowed to get up off their seats once they're sat down. It will be the visitors that can get up and go to we used to have machines in here where you could just get the drinks, the tea and the coffee. Some prisons have what they call like a little canteen. Used to be run many years ago by the WRVS, which is the Women's Royal Voluntary Service, and they'd come in and make tea and cakes and coffee and sell it and use that money, and it used to go for charity. Those things have changed now. So they're going to come through this door. You should be able to see on the camera. We've got toilets just there that visitors can use. And then when they come through this door, a number of things are going to happen. They've already been searched at the gate, but they're highly likely to go through some process again. Like I said, they've got the toilets. You might be able to see on the floor there's some yellow dots. There's 3 of those yellow circles that you can see. And if we've got the drug dogs, the passive drug dogs in, they will be asked to stand on one of those each as the passive drug dog passes around them. And obviously that's for reasons of there are some visitors who may try to be bringing drugs in through these doors. If the dog detects the presence of a substance. At that point, two things will happen. That person will be given a choice. You can either have what they call a closed visit, which I'm going to show you in a few minutes, or you leave the prison. We do not make any assumptions about whether this person is carrying drugs at that point, because sometimes people genuinely, innocently have got contact somewhere in a car, on public transport, and the dog has picked up the substance that may have been transferred to them. So we make no judgment on that, although it's a hard and fast rule. If the dog detects, it's a closed visit or no visit. I know it might seem harsh because people have protested that they don't deal in drugs, that they've never taken drugs in their life, but we have to have some benchmark rule, and the benchmark rule is if the dog detects, you can still have the visit, but it's closed, and I'll show you that in a few seconds. And as they're coming through, all the men that come through, particularly those that would be obviously males, adult males I should say, they're going to get a stamp. You should be able to see just there, it's a bit like when you used to go into the old discos many years ago, where you get an invisible stamp and you go in. So that when visitors leave this building, all the men will have to show the invisible stamp so we know that they're the ones that came in are going back out again. When visitors leave at the end of a visit, prisoners will stay seated, and no prisoner will be going back to the wing until such time as we've accounted for all the prisoners, and no visitor will leave the prison until we've accounted for all our prisoners. So when we're happy that we've got all the people we should have in the right place, that's when the gate will unlock and let the visitors get out. Now, in a prison like this, where there's a reasonable walk to get to the gate, by the time people have walked to the gate, we've already decided there's no problem, so they get out quite quickly. So that's now, as far as bringing things in, because people say, can visitors bring stuff in for prisoners? And the simple answer to that today is no. No, there was a time when I first joined the service, not only could people bring in cigarettes and bits of books and magazines, and all these things could come through the door. It doesn't happen anymore. I remember when I was in the service, and I'm talking about the 70s, probably the very early 80s, when they were still allowed a remand prisoner, that's a prisoner that's sort of innocent until proven guilty, going through the court process, they were allowed to have alcohol and food brought in to the visits. Now, the food, when it came in, would have to be eaten on the visit. The alcohol was taken away by a member of staff, marked up to who that it was for the prisoner, and when the prisoner went back onto the wing, they would turn up at the office where the officer would pour that bottle of beer or whatever it might be, but it wouldn't be spirits. Spirits weren't allowed. Pour the bottle of beer into a cup, and the prisoner would have to drink it there in front of the member of staff.
Officer Goodwin, let me just
There's a limit in how much. I think it was a pint of beer and a small glass bottle of wine.
Let me just interject, because I remember when you first told me this. It was a couple of years ago when you first told me this, and I was absolutely gobsmacked that there was a time, it's still quite recently, I guess, certainly a time in my lifetime, where prisoners could have visitors bring them in alcohol and be able to drink it later on in the wings. And I guess what got me was seeing the amount of people that turn around now and say how easy prison is and how much softer it's got. But actually the reality is, it used to be that remand prisoners could have alcohol brought in and they'd be able to drink it on the landings, so they'd be able to have a nightcap before they go off into their cells.
And when you take into consideration, way back when I joined the service, remand prisoners were entitled to a visit every day, albeit it was only legally the minimum 15 minutes. They sometimes got a little bit longer depending on space that we got and time, but they had a 15-minute visit. And that's a throwback from a time way, way back, probably going back to Victorians, when it was a way of allowing families to bring food in for prisoners that were on remand, and it saved the prison service having to supply food. But it was something that we kept going right the way through up into the 70s. They stopped the alcohol first, and I came to this prison in 1988, and they were still allowed to have food on visits. Now, there was an officer that used to sit in a little office on the end of the visits room, and their job was to search through all the food. So whatever was coming through these doors would have to be undone, and the officer would have some spoons and knives and forks and be opening all this stuff up to check, particularly the cakes. Nobody wants to find a saw, do they? A little hacksaw in there. So basically all that food would be checked. That was stopped sometime in the very early 90s, if I remember, about 91, 92. I think the prison service said we supply prisoners with 3 meals a day of reasonable or proper quality, there's no need for them to have their own food to the door, so they don't allow it anymore. Albeit, I said before, visitors can buy sweets and chocolates, but they have to be purchased on site, as does the coffee and tea. If prisoners do get coffee and crisps and tea, nothing goes back out with the prisoner when they leave to go back onto the wing at the end of the visit. They must eat all the chocolate, eat all the crisps, because they're not allowed to take anything back. And that's because we just need to be sure that something hasn't happened and something slipped through, and the chocolate that they're taking back isn't the one that was bought here, and it may contain stuff that we don't want it to. So, and it was a pretty hard and fast rule.
Okay, Officer Goodwin, couple of questions that have come in. Actually, two questions, but from the same person. This may make you laugh, I'm not sure. So Sue has said that her nephew was here at Shrewsbury Prison. He was a heroin addict, and she wants to know why she always got searched when she came in. And then she's asked, what happens if someone is caught carrying something they shouldn't?
Right.
Which concerns me slightly. Yeah, well, she's done both. But
it's when she said that she always got searched, in my recognition of working in this prison, everybody that comes through this door gets searched. It's an automatic process. I know of no visitor that's ever walked to this door and just walked past staff at the gate without ever having a search of some kind.
So that's regardless of the prisoner you're seeing, because obviously you might be coming to see some prisoners, for example, in this instance, who was a heroin addict, but you could be coming to see a prisoner who's here for not paying TV licenses or fines.
Yeah. So it's academic. The reality is that there are people here that are not paying their licenses, not TV, some only serving. A typical example, I don't want to make a political statement, and I'm not going to, but the guy that's just received a prison sentence, he was peeing on that on the memorial for the police officer.
He's just got 2 weeks.
He got 14 days in prison for that. He'll probably only serve about 5 of them. In any event, he's entitled to take 7 days off because people serve half their sentence, but because of the way that weekends work, we don't discharge prisoners on Sundays, so he'd likely got out on a Friday, possibly a Saturday as well. So he may have served 4 days or 5 days or 4 nights in a prison for stuff like that. So you've got those at the end, but one way or the other, regardless of that, everybody that I'm aware of gets searched through the door.
Let me just pick up on those 2 points very quickly. I'll pick up on Sue's very quickly. Sue's just jumped on. Sue, I hope you're saying where you felt a little victimised, you meant when it was a prison, not by me asking the question, so apologies if it was from me. I think Officer Goodwin's just answered. Everybody was searched the same, and he'll talk in a second about how children will be searched and babies and stuff like that, because ultimately visits is probably the place where the most amount of transfers happen of illegal substances and contraband, effectively, isn't it?
It's always a risk, bearing in mind that probably the vast majority of people come to visit, and they don't come to try to bring stuff through these doors. But there are some people that do. Now, you have to think about this. It's not always a voluntary situation. We found before that some people have been pressured to bring stuff through these doors, so they've not all been willing volunteers to bring stuff in through these doors. We intercepted a phone call one day from a young prisoner that was basically threatening his own young girlfriend to bring drugs in through these doors. And the reason for that is he was probably well into debt with other prisoners, so to save his own skin, he was prepared to sacrifice his own partner or his own young girlfriend. We intercepted that, so that didn't happen. And you could listen to the phone call. She really didn't want to be involved in this at all. So it's not always a case that everyone's a willing volunteer. But no, it's one of those things. And you have to bear in mind, and I'm aware that I've got a young audience watching this as well, some people are trying to bring stuff to this doors hidden in places that we're actually not allowed to look. We're just not allowed to look. I'm talking about intimate searches now. And what may happen sometimes is that they'll get up and they're allowed to use the toilet through visits. They'll nip into the toilet. They'll retrieve this stuff from wherever it's hidden. They may try to bring it through in their clothes. They might try to keep it in their mouth and bring it through. They will be searched again when they come through the gate. And I've got to be honest, that may be. There are some staff that are much better at it than others. And it may get back to these doors and then either kiss their partners and it's swallowed or it's handed over on a visit. So there are those risks involved in visit. I've got to be honest, Drones can be the bigger problem today because drugs are coming through in a much, much larger amount. You're talking about industrial scales where you might not find one mobile phone being smuggled in. Now it might be 5 or 6 on a drone, and it may be a huge amount of drugs worth multi thousands of pounds, stuff like that.
So just on the searching, before you move off, because there's a couple of questions here. One is about children and babies, because obviously how do you search those, or how do you search them? And the other one is legal visits with solicitors and police and people you wouldn't expect to be carrying things. Would they still all get searched?
No. As far as children go, yes, children will be searched as well. And obviously it's a very sensitive subject. It's a sensitive thing for staff to have to deal with, because if you're coming to a visit and you've got 2 and 3 year olds, some families and mums and dads and granddads and grandmas would find that really difficult to deal with, that we're searching a young child. But we have to have a baseline. We can't sort of pick and choose who we think may or may not, because we have no idea what's going on outside in their world. As I said, the threats that may be coming, or they may be willing participants. We've had grandmothers arrested. When they get caught, if they get caught for bringing drugs into jail, it's an automatic prison sentence. There's no fines. It's an automatic prison sentence. So anyone that's caught, we will hold that person. The police will be called. The police will come and arrest that person, take them down the station, and due process will take that place. So yes, children. There are many prisons, and most of them I know of, don't even allow young babies for the mothers to come down with spare nappies. Simply because there have been known in times where they've used the spare nappy to try to tuck the drugs in there, and sometimes they're hidden in the nappies. They hand the baby over to the father to have a cuddle, and they're trying to find their way in to get the drugs that are tucked away in the nappy. So we'll supply a spare nappies and all that. Just on the issue of toilets as well, in all my experiences, when I first joined, there was a time when prisoners were allowed to use a toilet while they were on the visit, but that stopped many years ago. And prisoners in Shrewsbury, our visit time was 1 hour. We only had this capacity to offer a 1 hour visit to families, and we'd have 2 lots. So we'd start at say 1:45 to 2:45, and 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock for visits. There are other prisons that do things differently. Featherstone Prison, I do know because I worked there as well. There were 2 hour visits in the afternoon. It is a slightly lower category than this prison. You've got open prisons where they may have a much more relaxed regime about visits and times in open prisons. But 1 hour for convicted. Not a lot of time really, when you consider that you might have been travelling for 2 to 3 hours to get here, and if you've got children in tow, that can have its own difficulties, and then you get a 1 hour visit and we'll be saying, okay guys, thanks very much, everybody needs to leave now, and they've got to get back in and do that return journey and stuff like that. Got it? I just want to move across now to closed visits, because they are an important part of how we manage a visit section. So I'm just going to take a walk that way, Joel, if you can pick me up, please.
I will. And you know what? I thought I was going to have to be the prisoner, but actually I can send our sales and marketing director. She can be the prisoner. So Harriet, if you would be so kind.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, and I'll explain why we use these, yeah.
It's because of that inappropriate use of social media. Yeah, keep going around, yeah. It's a highly technical operation here, as always. Graham's just, Officer Goodwin's just taking the cable with him as he takes the microphone. I can see, yeah. Now, I've got to be honest here, Officer Goodwin. Can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Right. Just to explain...
Officer Goodwin, before you start, can you hear me okay?
You'll have to speak up a little bit.
Okay, so let me just turn my mic down. So yeah. I've just noticed, as that prisoner has come round, she has got a mobile phone.
Yeah?
A prisoner has got a mobile phone.
Well, let's put it this way. It not only would they not have the mobile phone, it wouldn't have been a female in this prison that walked around there either. We got things slightly back to front because it was a male prison, so the male prisoners would be behind there. Closed visits. We'll talk about closed visits simply because there are 2 kinds of visits running here. We have what they call contact visits, and that's where, when you saw the main room out there, families are allowed when they first come in, and it's reasonable contact, what we call reasonable contact. So they can hug their families and their friends and their children, and then they sit down. What we don't allow is for people like, sometimes the younger generation get a bit tempted with the girlfriends, want to sit on the boyfriend's knee, and there's been the odd occasion where sometimes inappropriate behaviour has taken place, or they've tried to, we spot it. We don't make a big deal of it. We usually have a whisper in the prisoner's ear, need to sit back on the table properly, or we'll stop the visit, or you'll end up on closed visits. So closed visits can be used. Now they're used for different reasons. Governors make decisions about whether prisoners come on to closed visits, except for when the drug dog identifies it's an automatic, but it comes under the auspices of the governor's regulations. And it may be that there might be some suspicion of the prisoner, maybe somebody in their history and past have been trying to smuggle stuff through the doors, or get families to smuggle it through. There may be a time when families or friends are under serious suspicion. Through our security intelligence, governors can make decisions then about whether a prisoner will come on to closed visits. There may be disruptive prisoners. There's been once or twice where prisoners have gone disruptive. They've got family problems. People lose their tempers and things go off in a visit, and you can see that's highly dangerous. So a governor might decide that closed visits. We may have a prisoner in the segregation. In other words, they're serving punishment time in the segregation unit. And if they're going to have that visit, the governor might say, well, I'm going to let you have that visit, but it will have to take place in the closed visit sections. And it operates very much like the American system. You'll see the prisoner there who would be still fiddling with the phone, which they wouldn't have, of course. Well, I'd like to think they wouldn't have. There'll be a chair in there where they can sit down, and the families come in here. Now, we run 1 hour visits. When the family come in here, they stay in here. They can leave at any time, but there's no going back and forth out to the door to go and get tea and coffee. And the children that are coming in, the children are going to have to stay here as well. Even though I'm going to show you a little play area we had for children, basically that would basically mean that they're unsupervised by parents. So when children come in here with their families, they have to be continually supervised by their parents or guardians, whatever. So we had a couple of things in here, little toys to play with children, and there were one or two other things that they could just occupy children, because you can imagine here it's a pretty there's not a lot to occupy young children, because some of these children coming through might only be toddlers. They might only literally be just learning to walk. They might just can't talk, can't walk very much, and it's just a place to them. They don't know where they are. It's just a place. So the visit will take place behind it. We got built-in speakers here. You don't know the American system, you see them on phones. We've got little built-in speakers there where they can hear and see each other. And just behind the prisoner, up on the wall, you probably can't see it now, there is a camera. We've got 3 closed visits here, and there's a camera. So in our control room, we can keep an eye on the prisoner. You wouldn't think they'd get up to much here, and the reality is there's nowhere for them to go because they're locked into there. But occasionally the camera's picked up. Some young lady has been sitting here, and it's the prisoner's birthday, and they've decided to, give the prisoner a little bit of a surprise for their birthday. I won't say any more than that because of my audience, but you can see. But normally it very rarely has any problems hearing closed visits. So your time's up. Time to get back to your cell. Off you go. Thank you very much. We move this way. Any questions on that, Joel?
There's been quite a few questions coming in about various different bits. Let me see where you're going to end up, and I'll reposition the camera for you. I think, let's wait for you to come round. Perfect. Where are you going to be? Okay, cool. Let me just bring up a 4 camera. I haven't been on camera a lot this morning, so I kind of feel like I have to put myself on quick. I think I find it really interesting. I know that when we first started doing this, we spoke a lot about visits because you and Keith and Mick, our other tour guides, and the 2 Steves, certainly used to say to me a lot that visits was a really important area of the prison because it's where prisoners it's the only place they get to mix with their families and with their kids. So it's really important to have it quite calm, quite relaxed, so they can have that time with their families, because it's only an hour, potentially once a week, but at the same time it's quite high pressured because of the risk of contraband being smuggled. And I can just remember going to see closed visits for the first time and walking in and just feeling so, I think sad is probably the right word, that there will be parents that have to bring children in, and being a parent myself, and prisoners that will see their kids through here, and those 2 tiny little toys where just the idea that kids playing there watching their parent have that communication, to me that's really sad.
You're right, and even in the open visits, I mean, personally, I know me, and I speak for probably many staff, certainly at Shrewsbury Prison, we always try to encourage good visits for is that a positive visit is going to have an effect sometimes on the prisoner's behaviour. You must remember that the reason why those convicted prisoners get those 2 visits, which are sort of theirs enshrined for them, is because the department have decided and said that it's a positive thing to have family contact, to keep people in contact with their family while they're in prison. You must remember the vast majority of people that come to visit are decent, honest, law-abiding citizens, and they can have a positive effect on their family and on that person when they get out of prison. And some of these men are coming in, they've got tiny children. They've still got children to go back out to. So all that's about keeping those connections going there. The last thing you need on visits, and like you said, it can be attention, if there's an issue going on in the relationship, and you've got an issue going on in the relationship where you've got the prisoner and they've been talking on a phone, which isn't quite the same, and then they come and meet each other physically across the table, and they may be having these issues. And you can imagine the emotions. It's difficult. Remember, when prisoners are in here, they don't have the normal access to manage those things as people outside, and it's also very difficult for the families, of course. You have to bear in mind, and it's not a secret, when people come to prison, their families to some degree are going to have to suffer that punishment as well. It may be that they've lost a breadwinner. It may be that they've now got to manage children on their own and deal with all these issues. It may be that there isn't quite enough money coming into the house anymore and they've got to go down and deal with the benefit system. All these things can put pressure at both sides, and those things may show themselves up in prison as well. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I've known some prisoners come in out of jail for 20 or 30 years and their families come in and out on a continual basis, and it makes no effect on their behaviour whatsoever. But there are others that come in that do have a positive effect. As I've said before on this series, we've had prisoners come in once and you've never seen them again. You've had them coming a couple of times. They get out, they settle down, they do something else with their lives. And there are those that just keep continuing coming for many, many complicated reasons of why they keep coming back into prisons.
Let me just pick these up, sorry, to just very quickly. A few different people asking about whether there's open days, whether we're open and stuff like that. We are no longer a working prison. We don't have prisoners here because, as you can see, the doors are open and unlocked, and Officer Goodwin is the only officer here at the moment. So we are a tourist attraction, and we are open 7 days a week, and we reopen on Saturday, which we're very excited about. But if the question from Mary was, do prisons actually have open days? I certainly know that I got to go on a tour of Shepton Mallet prison when it was still a working prison. That's how I first did it. It was run by a prison officer from the psychology department and one of the psychologists, and it was specifically designed to take probation officers, new officers, people that were going to work in young offending, and people that had to kind of really understand the prison system. And they did it at Shepton because it was a Cat C, so it wasn't particularly dangerous, and I got to go on one of those. I got kind of snuck onto the back of it by my wife.
I think with open days in that sense is when we have people through, they're going to have some connection in a professional manner about either going on to work within the criminal justice system. So for them it's a bit of a college day out to come and see how the things work in reality. We don't really have open days where people can just come in willy-nilly. It doesn't. You can imagine for the security reasons, stuff like that. What we do have and operate in prisons, and I'm not sure how many, but I know that some prisons do this, they have what they call, like, sometimes a Father's Day, and basically it won't be done in the visits, it'll be done in a different environment. Those prisoners will be selected or apply, and then what will happen is the families will come in, they will get longer, but it's more than just about sitting talking to your partner while the children may be trying to preoccupy themselves with something else. It's about engagement with children. So it's sort of a father and children day, really, and it's and what we're encouraging is basically some fathers say they'll sit and share that quality time with the child, exclusively with that child, read them stories, do some painting, whatever it is that just keeps them connected. So they do that, but they are actually, they're not just open days. We don't just have people wandering around the prison. I just don't think that's going to work. But no.
Another one that's come in from Mary again, and actually from Sue, is how many prisoners would have a visit at any one time? and how many visitors would be there, so I guess how many people will end up in this room, and would you have all different types of inmates mixed, so you'd have potentially murderers and robbers and paedophiles or sex offenders and tax evasion all in the same room at the same time?
Visits room is a visit room. It would be extremely difficult logically to start separating people into their different categories. You just couldn't do that. You'd never have enough time in the day or enough staff to do it. This visits room had 25 fixed tables in here. So basically, a prisoner is allowed 3 adults on a visit, and obviously there would maybe children. So there might be 1, 2, or up to 3 small children in as well. So it's possible for this room to contain up to 120, 130 people when it's visit. Yes, remands can have visits at the same time today. It used to be different years ago. We used to have a special time for remands in the mornings and afternoons for domestic visits. But no, we do nearly all our visits in the afternoon now, domestic visits. And I've known remands being here, convicted prisoners, people that have been here charged with murder, with very serious offences, and people just coming in and serving, like I said, sometimes a couple of months for the lower level crime. So yes, there is no thing. As far as prisoners coming in that are on protection because of the kind of crimes they've committed, I'm sure the adults will understand what I mean by that when I talk about people like Ian Huntley and stuff like that. In Shrewsbury, they were actually in the same room together. Sounds, you'd think, wow, and all that. But the reality is we used to seat them, because there'd only be 2 or 3 in the room at the time, we used to seat them close to where we were, sort of in the corner, close by. And to be honest with you, in all the time I've been here, we've had very, very, very little problems with anything going off because of it. Yes, we've had some prisoners mutter things and all that, but remember, they don't want to lose their visit, so we go, it's best that you just worry about your own visit and don't worry about somebody else's.
And I think I'm just looking for Harriet, who might give me an indication. But I think you're obviously kind of tiptoeing, but you're very much talking about sex offenders and
yes,
predominantly paedophiles, and that's going to be really prevalent in the news at the moment with obviously everything that's happened with.
Or there may be prisoners on protection because they're so far in debt, they're under serious risks of serious physical harm. So yes, but we do it. We've always managed in prison. Not all prisons do the same thing, of course. We usually reserve in the mornings for what they call legal visits, because barristers, solicitors, probation officers, social workers will be coming in. I don't know whether the camera will pick it up, but we do have 3 individual interview rooms because barristers, solicitors and professionals are entitled to have those conversations with the prisoner, and we're not entitled to listen to the conversation, and we don't want to be honest with you, but we always must be in sight. So even when they're in that room, there are windows, observation windows, because we have no idea what may or may not happen in that room. So we can see.
There's no camera on them, but they're 3 rooms.
It's called insight out of sound, so we're always going to be seen. They're over there.
I think I'm going to lead you onto it nicely, but obviously, as you were just saying about with sex offenders and with paedophiles and such, because that area behind you was...
Where? For children.
Yeah, exactly. So
the area that you're behind here, this used to have a fence in it, and this was a little sort of a play area, like a little creche. There was a TV in the corner that showed cartoons. We had all the usual toys, appropriate probably up to 6 or 7 year olds, and it was a brilliant thing. And for very little cost, they brought it in quite a few years ago now, because before they had this, you're going to have young children, 2 and 3, 1 year old, 18 months, and they sometimes would be running around other people's tables. And that can cause friction between a prisoner that's trying to deal with a situation on a visit, and they've got somebody else's children scuttling under their feet. You can see the potential for that. And when we put that there, being young children, they nearly always automatically gravitated into there. Most of the time, we had a childminder in there. So there'd be somebody there to read stories, help them do a bit of colouring, and basically keep them occupied. They'd run back and forth to mum and dad every so often, and they might go to the machines to get their drinks and all that. So it really was really a good thing. But
this is a question. I've no idea what the answer to this is, and I don't think I've ever heard it asked before on a tour. But Jess has asked if a prisoner was here, convicted of paedophilia, would their own kids be allowed to come and visit them?
Well, that depends very much. It depends on the offence. It depends who the offence was committed on. It depends on what they call risk factors. And somewhere along the line, social services and those people that are involved in this kind of work will make a decision about whether that prisoner can have a physical visit from their children. We do have situations where sometimes no contact is allowed at all, not by any means. Not only were they not allowed to have visits, they weren't allowed to write, they weren't allowed to receive letters from those children, they weren't allowed to have telephone calls, they weren't allowed to have any communication, not even by third party. So nobody else could do that conversation for the child, if that makes sense, no third party, until such time as those people that look at those situations, security and all the risk factors involved, and they say, okay, there's no risk factor at this point with the immediate family, you can now have those normal communications and stuff like that. So sometimes it can be a full restriction until people are happy that it's risk free.
And we will pick up. We'll pick up more volume. We'll pick up a little bit more next week when we're on the Landings and Association about different types of crime, because there is a nature or a kind of a natural way, I guess, in terms of how prisoners will treat other prisoners based on their crime. For example, you said earlier the guy that's just gone to prison for 2 weeks for urinating on the statue, he potentially is going to have quite a hard time in prison from both white people and black people. He's going to have quite a tough...
who knows the way it could go? What you could end up with is going there, and there are people that might support his actions, depending on if he belongs to any particular faction. So I don't know the man, and I don't know whether he was a member of the right wing or the alt-right or whatever. That he may not be involved with anything, but it depends on the view that other people take, because there may be a problem with other groups in there, other ethnic groups in there, and there may be ex-servicemen that are serving time in prisons as well who may have a particular... There's all, and they might consider that the police officer, the memorial, he's a man in uniform, so therefore he's due that respect. So you can see, you never know in prison, but how that may go. You really don't.
And we'll certainly pick some of those up next week, and I think, again, we'll be able to talk more about A-Wing Association, C-Wing Association. Caitlin, age 10, has asked, was there an age limit to go to prison? Now, I'm not sure if she means for visitors or if she means for actual people going to prison, so perhaps you could just pick up both very quickly.
Well, if it's on a visit, you cannot come in to visit a prisoner in an adult prison unless you're 18 years old or older. If you're under the age of 18, you have to be accompanied by an adult, basically, to come into a visits room.
But there's no lower limit if you come with an adult, though, is there? No restrictions on the prisoner.
Babies coming, little babies being carried in arms coming through the door. As far as going to prison as a prisoner, the minimum legal age for basically being responsible for your actions in law is 10 years old. Although, even though if you're 10 years and older, you can be held responsible for your actions. And there have been times when young people of 10 and 11 and 12 years old have done some really, really, and I mean really, really bad things. However, they don't go to prison. We do not send them to a prison. They may be taken away to what they call secure accommodation. Because they're only 10, 11 and 12 years old, and they will be kept there until such a time, depending on what the judge has said, until if they get older and they're still having to stay in a prison and they get to be 15 or 16, they could end up in what they call a young offenders establishments up until the age of 21. If they go to be still in prison after the age of 21, they would be moved on to an adult prison. But we don't send 10 or 11 or 12-year-olds to prison. They have to be specifically really, really, really quite horrendous things that have been done. I know for the 10-year-old, this would be out of your time frame, but for the adults that may be watching, we're aware of things like the Jamie Bulger case and stuff like that, where young people for that situation. But yeah, I think I might have covered that.
Yeah, no, absolutely perfect. I'm just having a very quick look because I'm conscious we've got about 5-6 minutes left. I'm just working through questions. I know you have, so I'm kind of asking this a little bit knowing. Is problems that happen in visits, so I guess escalations in terms of fights, arguments, what happens, how do you deal with that with officer 130 people and suddenly something kicks off?
Well, when this visits room's full and busy, which it nearly always was, there'll be an officer where Joel's standing. That's the desk. That'll be the person that's sort of in charge of the staff here. IC, as we call it, the in charge, a senior officer, and there would be 4 other staff. So there's 5 staff in the whole of this visits room. We have cameras up in the roof space, which you probably can't see, and they're controlled by what they call a control room. So they're basically keeping an eye on what's going on. Those cameras all have the ability to zoom down into and rotate around the room. And there's 4 of us. We'll just be every so often we'll get up and walk around the room and just sort of just keep an eye on what's going on. Yeah. Do things happen? I must be honest. It's been an extremely rare situation that things have gone off in prisons. Very often the case may be that perhaps something's tried to be passed to a prisoner, drugs or illicit material, and an officer spied it, seen it happening, and then gone to the table and trying to deal with that situation. You might get the situation where the prisoner then is trying to put it in their mouth and swallow it. So when it's swallowed, obviously you're going to struggle with that situation and or fighting in the visit. But I must be honest, it's been quite rare. Other than those situations, it's been quite rare that I've seen too many flare-ups. It happens occasionally. I'd be a liar to say that it doesn't happen. And if we think it's going to be serious, we're going to hit the alarm bell and get as many staff down here as it's possible to get, deal with the situation where the prisoner may have to be taken away down to the segregation unit and the visitors may have to leave the visit. So, yeah, we deal with it as we see it. We never know. When you're in a prison, there's a lot of routine in prisons, but every single day can be different. And things can happen when you least expect them to. And they can happen from people that you least expect to be involved in something. You just don't know. You don't know.
Sorry, you're looking to me for another question.
I can only keep talking for so long.
Well, you say that. Let's have a quick clothing. So you said obviously prisoners wear bibs when they come in, red bibs. Do they all have to wear a certain type of clothing? Because obviously, again, we'll cover it more in association, but we covered it previously about what prisoners wear.
Sort of covered it before originally when prisoners first come to prison. They could be either in prison clothes. Remands are still entitled to wear their own clothes, but there are conditions based on that, and that means that they always must be able to have an exchange of clothes on a weekly basis. So if they've got their own clothes on, what will happen is that on their weekly visit they'll have to have a dirty set could be handed out, a clean set could be handed in, and there'll also be the third set. They always have to have set of 3, one that's sitting in the stores ready for the prisoner to swap.
But they wouldn't wouldn't all wear the same clothes when they come to visit, so they could be wearing jeans and a t-shirt similar to what the visitors would be wearing.
Prisons have certain conditions as well. All the ones I've worked in insist that when mostly prisoners end up in tracksuit tops and bottoms when they come to prison, particularly convicted prisoners, and they are what they are. They're just tracksuit tops and bottoms. But prisoners do get issued with shirts and jeans and all that. And the idea behind, we always say prisoners must wear a shirt and jeans to come to a visit because it's about setting a standard. And the vast majority of prisoners are glad. They like that. They like the chance to wear their jeans, wear the shirts, and be smart and tidy rather than walk around in tracksuit bottoms. So we make it, some prisoners are not bothered, but we make it a rule. They say, no, if you come to the visit, you have to be appropriately dressed, as it were, yeah. But like you said, there is the slight difference if you've got a remand prisoner that's in their own clothes, but they all wear bibs anyway. Regardless of what they're wearing when they're in visit room, they'll all wear a bib, an identifying bib.
Perfect. I think we're there. We've just coming up to our hour, which is unusual for us to finish spot on time, but we started a few minutes late. So I think we're there. We've already spoken about, someone's just asked whether they wear tags to identify them. Officer Goodwin's already covered about wearing bibs and also how visitors will be tagged with a UV. Here's a very quick one, and then I think what we'll do is we'll talk very quickly about next week's. We'll do our plugs, obviously, because we need to do that so sales and marketing are happy. But somebody's asked, has a judge ever been sent to prison?
Yes.
Yes. They're actually Lord High Justice, aren't they?
We've had judges, police officers, prison officers, airline pilots. It doesn't matter. there is no...
Never had solicitors, though, surely?
We've had solicitors.
No.
Yes, we've had solicitors, barristers. Few and far between. I've got to be honest, they're not part of what you call the common element. I don't mean that as people, but the common element of why people come to prison. Get that right. But they will. Yes, yeah. You must remember there have been MPs that have come to prison. If you go back about 10 or 15 years ago, no secret, public knowledge, Jeffrey Archer spent time in prison. Another MP came because he was lying about a speeding ticket he got, or his wife was lying, and it was basically lying to the court, so diverting the course of justice. So they came to prison for that as well.
I can't tell you how many emails I must get a week and how many tags I get on my Facebook page every week from people saying, "Have you got space for this politician?" On both sides of the fence. It is quite a common one I get from people. Can you please put this person in?
Them that get to make the rules make them for their own benefits, not everybody else's. Done?
Yeah, I'm there. I'm there. Let me just do. So next week we are going to go on to the twos. We spoke about this a lot. We're very excited by this one because I've been enjoying these. I think you've been enjoying them too.
Yeah, they're great. Yeah,
it's a reason to get out of bed in the morning, isn't it?
I love it when people come to see me when I've got them standing in front of me, because then I can tell the jokes, guys.
So next week we're going to do associations. We'll cover what happens when prisoners are outside their cells, how they mix, how landing officers have to deal with 83 prisoners to officers potentially. We'll probably cover a little bit what happens at nights, the difference between A wing and C wing, and also for us it'll be live, so you'll have people watching you from the landings above, from the far end of the landing. We're obviously going to social distance everybody still, but if you wanted to come and watch that, just book yourself onto a self-guided tour. Make sure you turn up ideally by 10:30, 11:45, so you can get yourself a good place to stand and watch. And then we will have a microphone as well, so you can ask questions live to Officer Goodwin, and you can see it and hear it and everything. And we'll probably also put you into our live too. So that will happen next Wednesday at the same time. And I think the week after that, I think we're going to do the Governor's office.
We can do, yeah. I'm looking forward to live because people can see how much younger I look in real life.
Well, and thinner,
and much thinner. Yeah, I don't like cameras.
So we'll do that next week. I'm just trying to think what else. We obviously open Saturday. I think I've plugged that one enough. Tours restart on the 18th of July. So guided tours, slightly reduced numbers, but that will make it more intimate.
I know that myself, Keith and Mick are really looking forward to doing those tours. We do get, personally, at a personal level, I know the three of us, all ex-officers, we get a great deal out of it ourselves. So it's not just about pushing information at people. We actually enjoy that interaction because we want to tell people the truth about prisons and not these images that sometimes you see on TV the way it really is, rather than the way that sometimes it's perceived to be. So we look forward to that.
And I'm really pleased because 5 weeks in and we finally managed to get you to turn off your watch alarm.
No, it's due to go off at 9 o'clock.
Oh,
and I put it at 9 o'clock in the morning because I've decided that I need to start a new life, and that new life is going to be I'm going to get up at 9 o'clock in the morning, not 11:30. That's the privilege of being nearly retired, I should say.
Yeah, not retiring yet. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you very, very much for joining us once again. We have got an evening live, a paranormal live this Saturday with myself, Stacey and Lauren, and then obviously we will be back next Wednesday with Officer Goodwin, but he will be here. I'm not sure exactly which days you're working, but you'll be here over the weekends.
I'm certainly coming in on Saturday and Sunday. I'm starting off Saturday and Sunday when we're open.
You will be able to get
self-guided.
Yeah, you'll be able to get photos, social distance with Officer Goodwin. We'll stick him back in a perceived perspective kind of way. But anyway, that's it. I'm waffling on. So thank you very, very much, and we will speak to you and see you all over the next
Absolutely,
next week.
Guys. Looking forward to seeing you all.